I was elbow deep in a rotted dock plank when the seaplane landed. That was not something you saw, Sleffies. Every Tuesday morning in Harlan's Cove, Maine. We got lobster boats, the occasional kayak tour group, and once a year the Coast Guard cutter that made the whole harbor feel important for about 40 minutes. We did not get seaplanes, and we especially did not get the kind that taxied right up to the public dock, dropped its float bumpers, like it owned the water, and let out a woman in a charcoal blazer, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than my truck. I kept working. The Mayhew family had been waiting 3 weeks for me to get to their dock. And the wood was worse than I expected. Old, growth pine underneath, which was the good news. The bad news was that something had been eating the cross braces from below. And I had already pulled up 4 planks, just to see how far the problem went. My knees were wet, my hands smelled like salt and rot. The sun had barely cleared the tree line over the eastern shore. I heard her footsteps on the dock before she said anything. Even heels on old wood have a particular sound. This one said the person wearing them was not slowing down for anything. "You Liam Calloway?" I looked up. She was standing at the edge of the section I had already cleared, looking at the gap in the planks like she was calculating whether she needed to jump it. "Depends on why you're asking," I said. "Because Gil Prater at the hardware store said you're the best maritime restoration contractor in the county, and I need the best." I set down my pry bar. "Gil Prater sells me sandpaper. That's about the extent of our relationship. He said you turned down a contract with the Baxter Resort Development last spring. $500,000. They wanted me to gut the boathouse. 1890 framing inside. I don't gut things." She looked at me for a moment. Not sizing me up the way people do when they're deciding if you're worth talking to. More like she was confirming something she had already decided. "I'm Nell Hargrove," she said. I stood up, and that name landed differently than it would have 5 years ago, when I first came back to this coast from Portland and set up the business. Hargrove Marine Holdings. 3 generations of coastal property on the Maine seaboard. Everything from working piers to private island retreats to the Aldermere Inn in Kettle Bay, which was the kind of place people booked a year out and still felt lucky to get. If you worked timber and saltwater in this state, you knew the name. "All right," I said. "What does Hargrove Marine need from a guy standing in someone else's dock?" She looked at the gap I was standing in, then at me. "Step up first. This conversation is better on solid ground." I climbed out and she handed me a rag from her briefcase, which was not what I expected. "You carry those?" "I grew up on a working waterfront," she said. "I know what hands look like after a morning like yours." I wiped my hands and gave the rag back. She took it without flinching. "My grandfather's estate," she said, "has a succession clause. If I'm not married before the annual shareholder meeting on Thursday, interim control of the family trust passes to my uncle Whitfield. Whitfield will liquidate the Aldermere and the Penobscot Pier properties inside of 60 days. He already has a hotel group interested. The offer is on the table." I looked at her. Then I looked out at the harbor, where her seaplane was bobbing gently, expensive and impractical as everything about this moment. "And you're at my dock because?" "Because Whitfield tried to acquire your boatyard 2 years ago, through a holding company called Saltwater Capital. You identified the shell, refused the offer, and filed a complaint with the state attorney's office." I remembered that. The offer had come in at 3 times market value, which was the first red flag. The second was that nobody from Saltwater Capital would get on the phone with me directly. I had spent a weekend digging through filing records before I found the connection. "That was your uncle." "Yes. And you think that makes me what? Qualified?" "It makes you someone he can't reach," she said. "Everyone else he's tried to pressure or buy. You're not interested in either." I looked at the water for a long moment. A cormorant was standing on the end of my work float, wings spread, drying out. It did not look like it was in any hurry. You want the truth? I said. That's why I'm here. Then give me yours first. All of it. What's the ugliest part of this you didn't lead with? Nell's jaw shifted once. She looked at the dock, then at the seaplane, then at me. When she spoke, her voice dropped just a little. The Aldermere has been in my family for 70 years. My mother used to take the ferry from the mainland on Friday afternoons, when she was a girl. She would sit on the porch with my grandmother and they would watch the lobster boats come in. When she got sick, the last trip she made out of the hospital was there. We checked her into a room on the waterside. She sat on that porch for 4 days. Nell stopped. The hotel group that wants to buy it plans to gut the interior and put in a luxury wellness resort. Glass and concrete, they're going to take out the porch. The wind moved across the water. Old wood tells you things about time that new wood can't. That porch had probably been holding people for longer than I had been alive. I'll hear the rest, I said. That's not a yes. No. But it's not a no either. There's a difference. I picked up my pry bar and set it in the work bucket. One condition before we go anywhere. What condition? You come to my boatyard, you meet my crew, you see what you're asking them to get pulled into, before you ask me to say yes in front of a judge. Nell looked down at her heels, then at the dock planks between us. Fine. Not fine, I said. You don't get to say fine like it's a formality. These are people who have worked for me for years. Frank's been building boats since before I was born. Cassie does finishing work that museums try to hire away. If your uncle decides to come after me for this, they feel it too. Something shifted in her face. Not softened exactly. Recalibrated. All right, she said. I'll meet your crew. We leave in 15 minutes. I need to finish marking these planks, so the Mayhews don't fall through their own dock. She did not argue. She stood at the edge of the cleared section, out of my way, and watched me work. I noticed she did not look at her phone. My boatyard sat back from the waterline on a gravel road that the county had mostly forgotten about. The main building was an old fish house from the 1920s that I had rebuilt from the studs up after I bought it. Long and low, cedar-sided, smelling permanently of linseed oil and sawdust and the particular salt that comes off tools left near the water. There was a boat in the shed that Frank and I had been working on for 8 months. A 1947 lobster smack, owned by a retired schoolteacher in Gloucester who wanted it seaworthy again. The work was slow. The work was right. Frank was standing outside when we pulled up, drinking coffee from a thermos and looking at Nell's rental car. The way he looked at most things that arrived unexpected on a Tuesday. We getting audited? He said. Not yet. Frank owed him. This is Nell Hargrove. Frank looked at her. He had worked the coast his whole life, built boats for people with money and people without. And he had a gift for knowing the difference between someone performing wealth and someone born to it. He did not offer his hand right away. You the one whose family owns the Aldermere? Yes, she said. My wife and I got married in the garden there, 22 years ago. Nell went quiet for a moment. It's a good garden, she said. It was the right answer. Not sentimental, not performative, just true. Frank handed her his thermos. Coffee's better inside, he said, but I need this cup back. She took it and followed him toward the shop, and I stood at the car for a second watching. Cassie appeared from the paint room doorway, saw Nell, looked at me with a question on her face. I gave her the short version in about 4 words. Uncle, trust clause, courthouse. Cassie blinked. Then she looked at Nell, who was asking Frank something about the transom on the Gloucester boat, listening to his answer with real attention. Is she serious? Cassie said quietly. Serious enough to show up by seaplane. That's not what I asked. I watched Nell crouch down to look at the keel joint Frank was pointing to. She had mud on her heels now. She had not mentioned it. Yeah, I said. She's serious. I walked Nell through everything. The shop, the half-finished builds, the wall where I kept the old hardware we'd salvaged From boats that were gone now, cleats and chain plates and compass binnacles, that deserved better than a landfill. I told her the way I told every client. The easy version is almost always the wrong one. Patch it, paint it, move on, and in 3 years you're back or you've lost it. The right version takes longer and costs more and lasts. You talk about boats the way some people talk about houses, she said. I talk about everything built to last that way, I said. She stopped in front of the salvage wall. Her fingers moved along a brass portlight, tarnished green, that had come off a 1930s sailing yacht. We'd helped dismantle for a historical society in Rockport. How long have you been doing this? Running the yard, 7 years. Working on boats since I was 12. My father had a wooden skiff. He did not take good care of it. I paused. I did. She looked at me. What happened to it? He sold it when I was 15. I bought it back when I was 26. Is it here? In the far slip. She's not pretty right now, but she floats. Nell looked toward the back of the yard where the water slips were. Can I see it? Not part of the tour. She accepted that without pushing. That mattered. At 11, I was in a small office in Rockland with an attorney named Ms. Bergstrom, who wore reading glasses on a chain and wasted no words. She walked me through the temporary agreement, the property protections, the confidentiality terms, the dissolution framework. She asked me twice if I understood what I was entering. I said yes both times. She looked at my hands and said, "You're a trades contractor?" I said yes. She said, "Then you know something built right. The first time costs less in the long run." She stamped the paper and I signed it. Nell was waiting in the parking lot. She had taken off the blazer. She looked, for the first time since the dock, like someone who had been holding her breath and just let it out. "Well," she said. "Let's go get married," I said. The Kettle Bay Town Hall was a white clapboard, building 2 blocks from the water, with a flag that needed replacing, and a clerk named Doris, who had clearly seen stranger things than us, because she processed our paperwork without changing expression once. The justice of the peace was a retired high school principal named Mr. Aldecoa, who shook my hand with both of his, and told Nell she reminded him of his daughter. No flowers, no music, no one I had called ahead of time. When it came to rings, Nell went still. I saw her look at Gordon, her attorney, and then look away fast. I reached into the breast pocket of the jacket I had changed into. My father's watch was there, and next to it, the thing I had grabbed without entirely knowing why. A ring I'd found inside the hull of the Gloucester boat, wedged behind a frame timber, corroded but intact. I had cleaned it up months ago, put it in my pocket, thinking I'd look into returning it, and kept forgetting. Plain silver, sea-worn, old. "It's not mine to give permanently," I said quietly, "but it'll hold for today." Nell looked at it in my palm. Then she picked it up, and her hand was not quite steady. When she slid it onto my finger during the brief ceremony, I felt the weight of it differently than I expected. Not the ring itself, the weight of what it meant for someone to put a thing that old on your hand in front of a witness. Mr. Aldecoa said we were married. By 2 in the afternoon, we were in a conference room at a maritime law firm in Rockland that smelled like old case files and boat varnish. Whitfield Hargrove was already there, standing near the window with a younger man I didn't know, and a woman who turned out to be his attorney. Whitfield was late 50s, well-dressed, the kind of tan you got from places that required reservations. He looked at the marriage certificate on the table, the way a man looks at a dent in his car. "Nell," he said, "you've surprised me." She placed the documentation in front of the board trustee. "The succession clause is satisfied." Whitfield looked at me. "And what does a boat carpenter get out of this?" "I restore vessels," I said. "Not the same thing." He smiled like that was charming. "Of course. What do you restore, exactly? That prepared you for a Hargrove shareholder meeting." "I look at things people say are too far gone to save," I said, "and I figure out which ones they're wrong about." The trustee, an older woman named Mrs. Galloway, who wore a lanyard with the trust seal on it, read through every page twice. Whitfield watched Nell the whole time. His attorney said 3 words during the meeting. Mrs. Galloway asked for clarification on the ceremony date and the officiant's name, got it, and set down her pen. "The clause is satisfied," she said. "Succession control remains with Nell Hargrove." Whitfield stood slowly. He put on his jacket with the careful movements of a man who had planned on winning. "This won't be the last conversation," he said. "No," Nell said. He looked at me once more on his way out. I looked back. There is a kind of man who assumes money is the thing you want most. Those men have never built anything with their hands, and they always underestimate people who have. Then Nell's phone started going. First her attorney's, then hers. Then Mrs. Galloway's assistant opened the door with the specific expression of someone who has bad news, and not enough context for it. Nell looked at her screen. She held it toward me. A local news site. The headline read, "Hargrove heiress in rushed courthouse marriage. Family source calls union a legal fiction." Below it was a photo of the 2 of us walking out of town hall, taken from across the street by someone with a long lens and either very good timing or a tip. "Whitfield," she said. Outside the windows, I could see a news van parking on the street below. Nell stood very still, the way she had stood on my dock that morning. Like she was already calculating 10 things at once and needed the stillness to count. I picked up the marriage certificate off the table and handed it to her. "You needed a wife by Thursday," I said. She looked at me. "Paper got you through the clause. Paper won't get you through this. Pack what you need, you're staying at the boatyard." She opened her mouth. "Not a discussion," I said. "Not tonight." She closed it. Nell Hargrove showed up at the boatyard at 8 that evening with a single rolling suitcase, a garment bag, and the expression of a woman who had argued with 4 people on the phone between Rockland and here, and was not done being right about all of it. I had moved some gear out of the small apartment above the shop, the one I'd built for visiting craftsmen, and never quite finished making comfortable. Clean sheets. Working heat. A window that looked directly at the water. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room. "It's not the Aldermere," I said. "No," she said. "It smells like cedar." "That a problem?" She set her bag inside. "No," she said. "I like cedar." The first week was not quiet. Whitfield's attorney sent 3 letters. A blogger in Portland ran a story about me that got some facts wrong and some facts right, and all of it unwelcome. Frank started answering the shop phone with, "Callaway Marine. We're not commenting," even when it was our regular lumber supplier calling about a delivery. Nell worked from the small table in the apartment most days. I would come in from the yard at lunch and find her phone propped up against a coffee mug, mid-call with her own attorneys, speaking in the careful, even voice she used when she was doing math in her head and talking to someone at the same time. She drank her coffee black in the mornings. I noticed she added sugar late in the day when she was tired, and then put the mug in the dish rack without making any comment about it. The apartment's one flaw was the water heater, which made a low groaning sound at about 2 in the morning. I had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. On her 3rd night, I heard her moving around at 2:15 and figured it had woken her up. I knocked on the door frame. She was standing at the window in a rain jacket she had thrown over her pajamas, looking at the water. "It's the water heater," I said. "I know. The sound is actually fine. I used to live on a boat." She said it without looking at me, watching something out on the dark water. I stood there for a second. "When?" "Summer I was 19. My grandfather tried to give me a job in the Hargrove offices. I told him I'd rather crew on a schooner out of Camden. He said that would embarrass the family." She paused. "I went anyway." I leaned against the doorframe. "How long?" "Full season, June to October. I learned to splice line, read tides, cook on a gimbal stove in 6-foot chop." She finally looked at me. My grandfather did not speak to me for 3 months after. But you went back. He was the only grandfather I had. She turned back to the window. And when I came home, he looked at my hands and said, "You've learned something." That was it. That was the whole reconciliation. I did not say anything for a moment. "I'll replace the water heater this week," I said. "Don't," she said. "I sleep fine." The next day she came into the shop with coffee for everyone. Not from the expensive place in town. From the diner on Pier Road, the one with the fishermen's booths and the laminated menus, in a cardboard carrier. She had asked Frank the day before what everyone took. She had written the orders on her hand. Frank took his cup, looked at her writing on her palm, and looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Cassie touched Nell's arm once, lightly, as she took her cup. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Nell said. "Not with performance. Just clean." A week and a half in, I took her to the Aldermere. The hotel sat at the end of a gravel lane on a low bluff above Kettle Bay, shingled in the old coastal way, with deep porches wrapping the front and east side, and a garden that came right to the edge of the lawn before the land dropped toward the water. It had been closed for the winter. The garden was bare, the porch furniture was stacked and covered with tarps. Inside, the main hall had not been touched in years, in the way only neglect makes a place look. Not dirty, exactly, tired. Like a house that has been waiting for someone to come back. I walked her through it, the way I walk every structure I'm assessing, slowly, with my hands on things. I tested the stair rail. Solid. I pressed my palm to a window sash, and felt the draft coming through the weather stripping. Fixable. I looked at the ceiling in the dining room where water had stained the plaster in an old ring, and told her that somebody had already fixed the source of the leak, probably 10 years ago, but nobody had ever finished the repair. "That's not decay," I said. "That's interruption." She was quiet beside me. We walked the length of the porch on the east side, the one her mother had sat on. It needed paint. The balusters were original, turned wood, and 3 of them were loose, but none were gone. Somebody had filled a crack in one of the porch boards with the wrong material, and it had shrunk in the cold, leaving a gap. I crouched down and looked at it. Epoxy consolidant, a custom Dutchman patch. "And this section lasts another 30 years, I said. Nell stood with her arms crossed over her chest, not against the cold, against something else. "When I was 12, she said, "I sat in that corner, with a book every Saturday for a whole summer. My mother used to come find me at 6 o'clock, and we'd watch the lobster boats come in from here. I let that sit. The group that wants to buy this," I said carefully, "what do they plan to do with the porch?" "The architect's rendering has a cantilevered glass extension in its place," she said it flat. "Better views," they said. I looked at the turned balusters, at the worn boards, at the corner where a 12-year-old girl had spent her Saturdays reading while lobster boats came in. "The views from here are fine," I said. She looked at me then. Long enough that I had to look back. "Careless renovation," I said, "is just demolition with better PR." Something moved in her face. Not much. Enough. On the drive back, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You said that about a boat once. On the phone when you were turning down the Baxter contract. I read the coverage. You researched me before the doc. I had to." "No," I said. "You wanted to be sure." She looked at the road. "Yes." We lived in a strange parallel for those weeks. During the day, she was Nell Hargrove of Hargrove Marine Holdings, and I was the contractor whose boatyard had become a base camp for a corporate succession dispute. At night, we were 2 people who ate takeout at a workbench because the apartment table was covered in legal briefs, and argued about whether the radio in the shop should stay on the AM station Frank liked or the one I preferred, and figured out without discussing it that she would take the first shower in the morning, and I would make the coffee, badly, and she would fix it when she thought I wasn't watching. She started editing my client quotes. Not changing The numbers. The language. You say the frame needs to be sistered, and nobody outside the trades knows what that means, she said one evening. My clients. No, your clients who understand boat framing know. What about the Morrow family, who just inherited a wooden Chris-Craft, and want to use it this summer? I looked at what she had rewritten. She had kept every technical fact and translated it into plain language without losing the precision. That's better, I said. She did not say anything, but the corner of her mouth moved. Whitfield called for an emergency trust review 3 weeks in. The claim was what I expected. The marriage was a legal arrangement, not a genuine union, and the succession clause required a bona fide marriage, not a paper transaction. I walked into that conference room still in my work clothes. I had been on a haul-out job in the morning, and driven straight from the yard. The shirt was clean, the boots were not. Nell arrived with her attorneys. Whitfield was across the table with 2 people I didn't know, and his own counsel. The questions started careful. Where did we live? Who paid which expenses? What were our plans after the succession period ended? Whitfield leaned forward. Mr. Calloway, would you characterize this marriage as entered into with genuine intent? I looked at him. I'd characterize it the same way I'd characterize any restoration project. I showed up not knowing exactly what I was getting into. I looked at the structure honestly, and I decided it was worth saving. Mrs. Galloway, at the end of the table, did not move, but her pen paused. Whitfield pressed. That's a very romantic metaphor for a legal arrangement. It's not a metaphor, I said. It's how I work. Nell's hand was flat on the table beside mine. Our hands were not touching, but I could feel the warmth of her palm an inch away. Whitfield looked at her. Is this really what you want, Nell? A man who fixes boats to be the face of Hargrove Marine? Nell's voice was even. A man who refuses to gut things that deserve better, she said. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Mrs. Galloway made a note. The review found in our favor. The trust control remained with Nell. Whitfield left without speaking. His attorney said, "This isn't over," which is what people say when it probably is. Outside in the hallway, just the 2 of us, for the first time in days without a phone or a meeting between us, Nell leaned against the wall and let out a breath. You didn't have to say any of that, she said. I didn't make any of it up, I said. She looked at me. The hallway was empty. The sounds of the building were muffled and distant. Liam, she said, and my name in her mouth sounded different than it had on the dock. She did not finish the sentence. She stepped forward instead, put her hand against my chest, and kissed me. It was not for Whitfield, not for Mrs. Galloway, not for any legal record. It was for the 2 of us. Standing in a hallway after weeks of pretending the line we were approaching was not the one we had already crossed. I put my hand at the back of her neck. She pressed closer. When she pulled back, we were both quiet for a moment. We should probably go before someone charges us for the conference room, I said. She laughed. Genuine, unguarded. It was the best sound I had heard in weeks. On the drive back, she sat close to me in the truck cab, not talking, watching the coastline. At one of the last lights before the harbor road, she said, I'm not someone who rushes things. Neither am I said. I've been working on a boat for 8 months. The Gloucester Smack. You remembered. I pay attention, she said. We did not rush it. The next morning she was still in the apartment, and I still made terrible coffee, and she still fixed it. But when I handed her the mug, our fingers stayed together for a second longer than before. Small things changed. She started leaving the window open at night, when the weather was right. The one I had never thought to open. The whole upstairs smelled like the water. She started walking the yard in the evenings, after the crew left, just moving through the space quietly, looking at things. One night I found her in the far slip, standing on the dock, looking at my father's skiff. She did not say anything. I stood beside her. She's got good bones, Nell finally said. She does. When's the last time she was in the water? 2 summers ago. I was going to put her in last spring, and then the Gloucester job came in. Nell was quiet. Then she said, "You should put her in this spring." I looked at the skiff, at the water, at the woman standing next to me, who had arrived by seaplane on a Tuesday morning, and somewhere, in the weeks since, had stopped being a client or a legal arrangement, or a problem I was helping solve, and had become someone I listened for, at the end of the day. "Yeah," I said, "I should." 5 weeks later, on a Friday evening after the crew had gone home, I came into the apartment and found Nell at the small table. No laptop, no phone, no brew. One folder. She was wearing my old quarter zip from the hook by the door, the one with the faded Callaway marine patch on the chest. Her hair was back. Her face was still in the careful way she got when she had already worked through the hard part of something alone and was bracing for the part that involved telling me. "What's that?" I said, though the weight in the room had already told me. She slid the folder toward me. "Dissolution agreement. My attorney drafted it. I had an independent review done, same as you did before the marriage. Your boatyard, your property, your business, the skiff. Everything is protected. Clean and clear." I stayed standing. Nell folded her hands. "The succession period is satisfied. Mrs. Galloway confirmed the trust is stable. Whitfield's challenges have been exhausted. The Aldermere is safe." She paused. "You gave me everything I asked for and considerably more than I had any right to ask. I don't want you staying because you started this and feel obligated to see it through." I looked at the folder, then at the ring on my hand. The old sea-worn silver one from the Gloucester boat, that I still had not removed. I had told myself it was for appearances. There were weeks in there when appearances had nothing to do with it. "You practiced that," I said. Her mouth tightened. "Several times." "How many?" "Enough." I sat down across from her. "The first morning," I said. "On the dock. You asked me if I was Liam Calloway. I said depends on why you're asking. You know why I said that?" She shook her head. "Because I'd been doing restoration work for 7 years. And every time someone leads with your name and your reputation, before they lead with what they actually need, it means what they actually need is harder than what they're saying." I looked at the folder. "You led with my name." Nell was very still. "I didn't say yes to your name," I said. "I didn't say yes to the money, or the protections, or even because of Whitfield, and what I thought about him. I said yes, because you stood in my shop and you let Frank look at you, and you stood in that corner of the Aldermere porch, and you didn't try to explain what you felt. You just stood there, and I understood it." Her eyes had gone bright. "I'm not staying because I started this," I said. I pushed the folder back across the table. "I'm staying because I looked at the structure and decided it was worth saving. That's not obligation. That's a choice." Nell looked down at the folder. Then she pushed it further away, off to the side, like it had become impolite just sitting there. "The apartment," she said, quiet. "I don't want to leave the apartment." "Then don't." I want it to mean something, not a legal address." "I know what you mean," I said. She looked at me across the scratch table with the folder set aside and the water heater clicking somewhere below us and the last light coming off the harbor through the window. "I don't want out either," she said. That was when the paper arrangement ended. Not in a conference room, not in a courthouse, at a workbench table above a boatyard, with cedar in the walls and water out the window, and 2 people who had been working in parallel for long enough that the distance between them had closed, without either one deciding to close it. Life after that was not simple. It was ours. The Aldermere restoration moved forward the following spring. I brought in 2 craftsmen I trusted for the interior millwork, and we sourced replacement shingles from a mill in Vermont that still cut the old profiles. We repaired the porch balusters one by one. We fixed the weather stripping on every window on the water side. We patched the plaster in the dining room and matched the ceiling paint to the original sample we found behind a light fixture. The porch stayed. Nell ran Hargrove Marine through a reorganization that took a year and a half and required every skill she had. She learned which fights to take to the board and which ones to let sit. She learned that Whitfield, without allies and without leverage, was mostly a man who felt he'd been overlooked by his own family for too long. And while that did not make her sympathetic to him, it made her more precise about where she directed her energy. Frank came to the reopening of the Aldermere. He brought his wife. They stood on the porch on the east side, the one we had repaired, and his wife cried a little and said the garden was the same as it had been on the afternoon of their wedding. Frank looked at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. In April, I launched my father's skiff. Nell was there, just the two of us, and the skiff and the harbor, at morning slack tide, when the water goes flat and silver and the whole bay goes quiet before the wind comes up. She held the bowline while I backed the trailer down the ramp. When the skiff floated free, she handed me the line like she'd been doing it all her life. Maybe she had. We took her out through the harbor mouth into the open bay. The old engine ran rough for a mile and then settled. The hull was tight. No softness in the planking, no weeping at the seams. Nell sat in the bow with her face toward the open water. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Your father knew how to pick good wood." "He did," I said. "He was better at boats than most other things." She looked back at me, wind in her hair. Harbor behind us. "You kept it anyway," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I kept it anyway." She smiled, and the water opened ahead of us, and I pointed the bow toward the outer bay and gave the old engine what she asked for. A year later, we had a real wedding at the Aldermere. The porch was full. Frank cried again and admitted it this time. Cassie wore a dress she described as appropriate for once, and danced with the contractor from the millwork crew who had driven up from Portland. When the time came, I used the old silver ring again. The sea-worn one from the Gloucester boat, the one that had been waiting inside a hull for someone to find it. Nell had asked about it once, early on, whether I'd ever found out who it belonged to. I told her I hadn't been able to trace it. She said, maybe it belonged to someone who needed it to go somewhere it would matter. I put it on her finger, and this time nobody said anything about taking it off later.